evening. Welcome to the Brennan Legacy Awards Dinner. For 2 decades, we've held this event in person in New York City. And around now, you'd be taking your seats with friends and colleagues. Well, this year, it's a bit different. We are so glad you can be part of this virtual gathering. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Kim Harris, a member of the Brennan Center's board and a past Legacy Award honoree.
Thank you, Michael. It's our pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program. We're 2 weeks out from the election of a lifetime, and in so many ways, 2020 has been a time of crisis, of public health, of racial justice, and of economic inequality. This year, the Brennan Center has been at the forefront of an imperative drive to save our democracy.
I want to tell you, I am so proud of the Brennan Center staff for how it's risen to the challenges, protecting voting rights in the census, pushing for a fairer justice system, and fighting for checks and balances and the rule of law, all while working remotely.
For tonight's program, we want you to hear directly from the Center's experts and from key partners in our fight for free and fair elections and justice for all. We also look forward to recognizing leaders from the private sector for all they've done to stand up for democracy this year.
On behalf of all of us at the Brennan Center, thank you for joining us. We are particularly grateful to all our event sponsors and pro bono partners. Without your support, none of this would be possible.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mirna Perez, and I am very privileged to lead the Brennan Center's talented team of voting rights lawyers and researchers. I am so honored to be joined by my friend, my compadre, Desmond Meade, who leads the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, a grassroots movement in Florida that started from very humble beginnings and has emerged as a powerhouse that not only inspires Floridians, but people all across the world.
I want to make sure I get this out ahead of time, how grateful I am for your leadership and for the support of the Brennan Center in our activities and in our efforts to end disenfranchisement in Florida.
It is just amazing and beautiful and powerful and a real testament to what Dr. King said about the moral arc of the universe being long and bending toward justice. When you were leading those coalition calls that were just constellation of people on an email list. Did you ever imagine that FRC would be raising $25 million to be getting returning citizens their rights to vote back?
I never thought that I would be in the position that I'm in right now. I never thought that FRC would have been able to accomplish what we've accomplished. Just knowing what a lot of returning citizens and voters were saying around the state gave me hope. And I knew then that, we're going to end up in this space where we're at.
I wonder now when we just face like a terrible, terrible setback where an appellate court chose to offer an interpretation of the Constitution that reduced aspiring voters and Americans who want to contribute to their communities as merely felons. It's hard not to despair. Where do you get inspired to feel like when this is all done, love wins, justice wins?
Throughout all of this, the one part that's really been silent is the fact that the governor has the power to embrace this clemency reform, to embrace the spirit of Amendment 4. We know that a governor can say, you know what? Everybody automatically get their civil rights restored, including the right to vote. We know that. And the current policy in Florida does not even require the payment of legal financial obligations. And so, according to our data, there's at least 4 times as many returning citizens that are registered voters than the margin of victory in the last gubernatorial race. And so I look at these things as an opportunity for us to reimagine the democracy that we aspire to have and to be able to actually achieve that.
To me, the real victory of Amendment 4 was that we convinced Floridians from all walks of life to go to the polls and vote for their neighbors. We inspired a movement in Kentucky, inspired a movement in Iowa. There's going to be a constitutional amendment in California. This is the first time in our country's history where there is no state that permanently disenfranchises everybody with felony convictions.
We've done an internal poll of 500 returning citizens. Over 90% says through hell or high water, they will be voting this year. As people who have lost the right to vote and fought long and hard to get it back, we have a newfound appreciation for the right to vote. And we honor that by actually turning out to vote. And I did myself for the first time in over 30 years, Brennan. That experience helped me to fully understand how sacred the act of voting is. So many people who have sacrificed their lives, who were murdered through state-sanctioned violence, fought through fire hoses and dogs and burnings and hangings, just so people like me would have an opportunity to vote. It transcends partisan politics. It transcends even the implicit racial biases or insecurities. And it takes me to a place that says something so simple but yet powerful, that me voting says that I am, that I exist, that I am an American citizen, that my voice counts, and that is so sacred. We have been out there in the front lines, and we have put the weight of the world on our shoulder, and says that if no one else is going to be there, FRRC is going to be there fighting for democracy. We will have a definite impact on the direction that this country is headed.
Thank you so much, Desmond. My soul feels more rested when I've got 5 to 10 minutes with you. I'm glad we were able to have this time together. Thank you for being such an important leader. Thank you for being such a dogged pursuer of justice. The country's better to have you, and I'm better to know you.
Brennan, thank you so much. It's great to know that there are champions like the Brennan Center and others that's out there in the world that have our back, that's fighting for us in every sector, every corner. And it's great to know that.
We proudly hosted Stacey Abrams a few weeks ago. She's a champion for voting rights and the founder of Fair Fight Action.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you to the Brennan Center. Voter suppression has been a part of American life since our inception. And whether you're talking about the inception of our nation, where only white men who owned property were permitted to register and to cast their ballots, fast forward to Reconstruction and the 15th Amendment, fast forward again to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we find ourselves in the 21st century relitigating and finding anew the ways that voter suppression manifests itself in our country. And we have a tension between whether we should expand access to include every single person who's eligible to vote, or whether we should limit access because of the specter of voter fraud, which is not real. As we head into this election season in full throttle, I believe that we can do something about it. I do not believe in the permanence of voter suppression. Through litigation, through legislation, through the executive power of many governors, we are starting to see opportunities to expand the methods of voting. And that is a good thing. That is a righteous thing in a democracy. But we know that leadership and that expansion is being met with threats, with intimidation, and with equally divisive legislation and litigation to limit who can participate. Because today we're talking about what is happening in Florida, when 65% of Floridians said, give the right to vote back to returning citizens. And yet the legislature and the governor have once again stripped them of that right. And so I thank you all for being here. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, and I'm delighted to join you as part of this virtual program for the Brennan Legacy Awards. We live at a time when, let's face it, our collective future will be decided, as they are frequently decided, by what happens in an election. And the security of our elections are of vital importance, not just in terms of mail-in ballots, which of course have gotten a lot of attention, but for all of the digital technology that goes into the tabulation of voting and the preservation of voting rolls in the world today. I'm especially delighted to see the work that the Brennan Center has been advancing in this area. Thank you for all of the work that all of you are doing, for all of the work that we all have an opportunity to do together to continue to support the Brennan Center.
Hi, I'm Liz Howard. I'm Senior Counsel on the Election Security Team at Brennan. I am delighted to be joined today by Jenny Bedane, an amazing partner to the Brennan Center. And we've had the pleasure of working with her over the past couple of years as election security has become a more important topic to not just election officials, but to voters. Jenny, we're so delighted to have you with us tonight.
Thanks so much, Liz. It's wonderful to be here, and I truly enjoy our partnership and think that Brennan Center is doing such amazing work to secure our elections. And so it's really a pleasure to talk with you today. As you mentioned, I'm part of Microsoft's Defending Democracy program. We've been around a couple years as a program focused on issues of campaign security, election integrity, and disinformation defense. We think that our upcoming elections are very important and that Microsoft and technology companies generally really have a role to play in defending those elections.
I'm very mindful of our most recent work together, which included a TTX, which is a tabletop exercise that's very similar to war games for adults. So emergency scenarios that election officials have to respond to so they can practice emergency responses and identify any gaps in their current plans. These exercises are more important in 2020 than ever before. The Microsoft team and the Brennan team had a lot of fun putting together some potential challenges that election officials might face on election day. What were a couple of your favorite scenarios?
I thought it was really fun to have the election officials think through a scenario where a big celebrity, and in this case, the example was Beyonce and her husband, decided to have an event and everyone with an I voted sticker could get in for free. And they started overwhelming the election offices trying to get access to stickers. And those are the kinds of scenarios that are really helpful in that tabletop environment. The other thing that I thought was really great was the interaction amongst the election officials. They were sharing ideas, best practices. One election official was explaining a relationship she had with a local tent vendor and what happens if the precinct locations, let's say their schools or otherwise, are all of a sudden closed down because of COVID. What do you do? And this one election official was saying, well, we'll just pop up a tent in the parking lot. And so that kind of resiliency planning is really a lot of what our training is about. We've also done a whole series of trainings with election officials together and in cooperation with CISA out of DHS. We've gone over some things that concern us at Microsoft in particular, things like ransomware, what adversaries out of Russia, Iran, and China have been doing, the kind of tactics that they've been using. And then conversely, what can you, just a normal, everyday election official, do to protect yourselves from that kind of attack? That session was really informative and helpful for local election officials to ground themselves in truth when there is so much information around them.
Even before the pandemic, recommendations included making sure that there were enough paper ballots for all voters, and those common sense concrete recommendations are going to enable election officials to weather whatever storm 2020 throws at them.
When you think forward to the election, what would you say is your number one concern?
I mean, it's 2020, so I'm hesitant to even guess. There will be places where there will be machine issues, whether that's due to cyber attacks or just routine equipment malfunctions. I think that's my biggest concern. It's just running into a routine problem and just not having those materials there. Dare I ask what your biggest concern is for November 2020?
As part of the Microsoft team, we put out a post where we noted some activity that we were seeing from nation-state actors, primarily out of Russia, China, and Iran, targeting a lot of people who are involved in political campaigns and the process around it. I worry a lot about what we call hybrid attacks, where some kind of cyber attack is combined with a mis or disinformation campaign that really just stirs so much chaos that people have a really challenging time identifying truth. What we saw in 2016 as far as attacks on voter registration databases, I worry about some kind of attempt against those systems combined with a disinformation campaign that either suppresses the vote or confuses voters. But one way that I know local election officials have been tackling it has been by saying, hey, if there's any information that you're getting that you're not quite sure about, go to your local election officials, go to your Secretary of State or go to your county clerk online, on Twitter, via phone, find out what they're saying about the situation, because that is a source of information that you can trust.
I look at this in two different buckets, right? So the potential hacking of our infrastructure versus potential hacking of people. Mis and disinformation is absolutely a big challenge. The Brennan Center is very proud to partner with NAS, so the National Association of Secretaries of State, and many other organizations on the hashtag TrustedInfo2020 campaign, which drives voters and members of the public directly to trusted sources. Our democracy needs all of us, and that requires us to be an informed voter and to be a thoughtful social media user and make sure that whatever we're sharing online or anywhere else is accurate. It is an important component of making the November 2020 election more secure.
So I have one more question for you. What is the good news?
There is so much good news. In 2016, there were over a dozen states that were still using paperless voting machines, which have been identified as a potential large vulnerability. And we estimate now that only approximately 4% of voters in the country are going to be voting on paperless voting machines. There's been a huge culture shift around election security over the past 4 years, and election officials want to harden their systems. They want to make sure that their systems are safe and that their voters' votes are counted as cast. We've been able to work with election officials on both sides of the aisle, and we find a lot of common ground and alignment on making our elections secure. And it's more important in 2020 than it's ever been before.
Election officials across the country have been doing what is mostly thankless work, and they've been thrown a lot of curveballs. And so we put together a video encouraging them in this last stretch as we go towards November. We hope you enjoy it.
Hey, giant fist bump to America's superheroes.
This election is incredibly important, and as a first-time voter, I know it wouldn't be possible without the people who show up every day to make sure that our elections are safe and secure.
I really appreciate your efforts. Thank you, and I can't say it enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
The team from Center for Civic Design just wants to say, you've got this.
You are dealing with unprecedented challenges, but I know you will remain focused on making sure that every vote is counted.
Many states are expecting a record turnout for this election, and that is possible because you are all working around the clock.
We all know elections aren't going to be perfect, but I've been inspired by the work you've done and how successful we've been so far, and know that many of us have your backs as you have our backs.
You worked really hard for this, and you're here now. You're all set. It's going to be great.
You're truly the guardians of democracy, and we're so grateful, and we're here for you every step of the way.
I know it's late nights, and I know it's going to get even later, but nobody appreciates the work you do as much as we do.
Thank you for all you've done during these challenging times to adjust and ensure that all Americans have a safe and healthy environment to vote.
These are challenging times, but we've never had a situation in America when we didn't have a free and fair election. And I know with thanks to all of you, that will happen again this year.
I appreciate you, I believe in you, and I thank you.
Thank you. I know you've got this.
Hi, I'm Laura Arnold. I'm the co-founder of Arnold Ventures. Our mission at AV is to maximize opportunity and minimize injustice. The world is bearing witness to the deep structural problems in the American criminal justice system. It's demanding the kinds of changes many of you have spent years advancing. The Brennan Center has been a key partner in this work. Its incisive analyses highlight critical issues and provide roadmaps for true reform. The Brennan Center led the charge on understanding the drivers of our declining crime rate. It analyzed the reasons people were sent to prison and provided a blueprint for safely cutting the prison population. It recently published an analysis of the steep costs of fines and fees and their toxic effects on our system of justice. I'm going to start by laying two truths on the table, and then I want to talk to you about where I think we can go from here. Here's the first truth. We live in an era of excessive punishment. Over the past half-century, incarceration rates in the United States have increased fourfold. 2.2 million people behind bars, 4.5 million people on probation or parole. Pretrial detention rates increased 433% between 1970 and 2015. half of all Americans report they have an immediate family member who is or has been incarcerated. What this means is that even though crime rates have dropped to historic lows, the criminal justice system continues to reach deeply into American life, to an extent never before seen in our country's history. Make no mistake, we chose to be here. We've chosen to be the most punitive among Western democracies. And no one has borne the brunt of punishment more than Black and brown communities. Black and brown people, especially Black and brown men, are so disproportionately represented in every part of the criminal justice system that it's impossible to look at the numbers and not recognize systemic racism. And Brennan's latest report demonstrates that the harms to these communities don't end with incarceration. In some respects, the harm begins there. The financial harms of mass incarceration pervade Black and brown communities. They perpetuate economic inequality. Incarceration results in lost wages, immense financial burdens on families, and bleak employment prospects. And the costs to taxpayers are inordinate. Mass incarceration is a poverty maker and a poverty trap. In a vicious cycle, low-income people are more likely to enter the criminal justice system, and the system in turn diminishes their earnings. Most of us would agree that this excessively punitive approach doesn't make us safer. Which leads me to the second truth I want to share with you today. Here it is. We know enough, more than enough, to demand and enact change. There will always be open questions, and we can always support more research, which Arnold Ventures is proud to do. We'll continue to invest in deepening our understanding of the drivers of criminal justice dysfunction and the effectiveness of solutions. But we're living in a transformative historical moment of renewed racial reckoning amid a public health crisis that most acutely impacts Black and Latino communities, and on the cusp of a critical election season. Here's what we can do. We can seize the opportunity to acknowledge America's 400-year history of racial injustice that continues to produce profound inequalities. We can take research and data to our legislators and to the public. And we can initiate transformative change that dramatically reduces the number of people trapped in our correctional system. Now is the time to end our era of punitive excess. So thank you, Brennan Center, for the important work that you do, and thank all of you for being a part of the solution.
Hi, this is United States Senator Cory Booker, and I'm excited, frankly, to really honor in every way I can from my spirit the Brennan Center. On my work from criminal justice reform to economic justice to voting rights, the Brennan Center is a rich resource. They are extraordinary in laying plain the truth of our nation and helping to design strategies to address those challenges. We have such promise as a country when we focus on the facts, when we commit ourselves to our highest ideals and common virtues, and when we do the work. I'm honored to be a United States Senator and have the chance to push forward legislation on criminal justice reform, voting rights, economic justice, environmental justice. And I'm grateful for all that the Brennan Center does to empower my work, but to challenge all of us to continue that work.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us virtually tonight. I'm Liza Goitein, and I co-direct the Brennan Center's Liberty and National Security Program. We work to advance effective national security policies that respect constitutional values and the rule of law. A major focus of our work these past few years has been emergency powers. When the president declares a national emergency, it triggers standby powers contained in more than 100 different provisions of law. These include some pretty extraordinary authorities, such as the power to take over and shut down communications facilities, and the power to freeze the US assets of anyone, including any American, the president deems it necessary to address a foreign threat. In December 2018, we published a guide that pulls together all of those authorities and their past invocations. Our guide became a vital resource when the president declared a national emergency just 2 months later to secure funding for his border wall. In the wake of this clear abuse of power, we spearheaded efforts to reform the National Emergencies Act to make it easier for Congress to shut down such abuses. Today, there are several major bills pending in Congress, sponsored by both Democrats and Republicans, that adopt the reforms we recommend. We're also preparing for the possibility that the president could abuse a different type of emergency power in connection with the election. And that's his authority to deploy the military domestically to suppress civil unrest or to enforce federal law. The law in this area is highly vulnerable to abuse, as we saw when the president sent 5,000 National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. during the protests in June. However, the law clearly prohibits the use of military troops in any way that could interfere with a free and fair election. It also prohibits voter intimidation by private militias or other vigilantes. The Brennan Center is working to ensure that these legal limits are widely understood and respected. Together, we will strengthen our democratic institutions in ways that will protect both our security and our core freedoms.
Hi, my name is Preet Bharara. I used to be the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York until I was fired by President Trump. It's really an honor to be joined by Governor Christie Todd Whitman. As many of you may know, the country has been a little bit in trouble over the last number of years, and that's why we're here, and that's why we work on these issues. And 3 years ago, it was a privilege to get together with the Brennan Center and Governor Whitman to form a bipartisan, in some ways nonpartisan task force called the National Task Force on Rule of Law and Democracy. And over the last 3 years, a great panel of folks, people who have served Democratic presidents and Republican presidents, led by and supported by the Brennan Center. We've submitted for public review and for congressional consideration 2 reports. We have more coming, perhaps. There's been no time that it's been more important to focus again on what makes America, America, the values and principles that are important to sustaining our democracy, enlarging our democracy. And those values and those principles are at risk. Governor, would you not agree?
I would absolutely agree, Preet, and thank you to you and to the Brennan Center for putting it together. I mean, really, the task force was prescient. It was, as you mentioned, made up of a bipartisan, nonpartisan coalition, and the things that we offered were not partisan. When we went down to Congress, it was interesting how many of them agreed with what we were suggesting as ways to try to deal with the inability of members to work together. It was interesting that in H.R. 1, that the House passed right at the beginning of this newest term, embodied a lot of what we had suggested. But as you say, our democracy is threatened today more than ever. I have never been so fearful of what our future holds. Our founding fathers warned us. When Benjamin Franklin was asked what kind of a government they'd given us, he said, a republic if you can keep it. And Abraham Lincoln was very clear that if we lost our form of government, it would be from within. And that's what scares me now. We are starting to see that, and why the report becomes so important. And so many of those recommendations fit right into the issues that we're facing today.
Governor, not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but you used the word prescient. Obviously, attention has been paid once again to the fact that this president is the only person who's running for president who never disclosed his tax returns on a voluntary basis. And so one of the proposals that the task force came up with was a requirement that people who run for president or vice president disclose their tax returns. And obviously, that's been brought into sharper relief based on these reports from the New York Times that President Trump paid a minimal amount in taxes. And perhaps of more concern is the indebtedness that he apparently will be coming into to the tune of $421 million if he's reelected to a second term. And so these issues are not just important for people to understand the financial standing of a president or a candidate running for president. What's been a major focus of the task force is that we have these things called norms. Sometimes you have to codify those into law.
Also, one of the recommendations on ensuring that there is a separation between the White House and the Justice Department, and some very clear fencing as to who intercedes, who can reach out in a particular case and who can't, because that becomes problematic, as we've seen so many times, this White House trying to interfere with decision-making at the Department of Justice, as well as the recommendation to ensure that you couldn't fire a special prosecutor except for cause. That becomes increasingly important, we have seen with this administration. The threats of firing has definitely influenced behavior. And you see it throughout the administration. And of course, from my particular perspective, the lack of science. I would argue that had the president paid attention to science and allowed pure science to be shared with the public, that we would be doing a much better job in recovering from this pandemic, and we wouldn't have lost tens of thousands of lives because we didn't take it seriously in the beginning, and we weren't focusing on getting PPEs, and we weren't telling them that this is the basic stuff you need to do to protect ourselves. Another part of our report went directly to that, which is a positive reflection on the task force members as well as the Brennan Center.
When we were talking about the science issues and the undermining of science and the undermining of scientific standards and the opinions and facts brought forward by well-respected scientists in this country, that was long before the pandemic happened. And we've seen a theme, whether we're talking about the Justice Department or we're talking about special counsels or we're talking about scientific agencies, there's a politicizing that takes place unlike anything we've ever seen before. So not just the EPA, not just the Department of Justice, but also the CDC. I'm from the Department of Justice, so I take pride in that institution for being avowedly apolitical in its best days. And assistant U.S. attorneys who do their job, you don't know and don't care if they're Democrats or Republicans, they just do their job. But there's no Republican or Democratic way to attack a disease. Or
it's like EPA. I mean, Mother Nature doesn't give a darn about geopolitical boundaries. We have to care about this stuff. We pay for it big time in lives and in actual costs.
Another concern that is central to what the task force has been caring about is the politicization of the election process. And that's very troubling too.
Well, the undermining of the post office is absolutely inexcusable as you're facing an election in the midst of a pandemic. We have had absentee voting and voting by mail for ages, and you just cannot find any justification, any facts that back up widespread voter fraud.
So yes, I don't call it the election on November 3rd anymore. I say we're in an election. The election ends on November 3rd. And I guess we should say a reminder to people to vote. If you're able to vote early, do that. But otherwise, make sure that you understand all the procedures and cross your T's, dot your I's so your vote counts.
Absolutely. Thanks, Preet.
Thanks, Governor.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming, as it were. I am Bob Atkins, and it is no greater honor in my life, frankly, and career to be co-chairman of the board of the Brennan Center with Patricia Baumann. I'm standing here in the center's memorial library for our namesake, Justice William Brennan, and I can think of no way to honor his memory and to carry on his legacy than to continue the fight for social justice for all. Of course, none of that would be possible without the lawyers, including many of you who are with us tonight. That starts with the brilliant Brennan Center lawyers who are fighting every day, night and day, to preserve the right to vote, to preserve liberty, and to restore justice. It is my honor tonight to recognize the impressive array of pro bono partners who have committed themselves to the fight for democracy and justice. In particular, I'd like to call out our pro bono champions. I encourage all of you, indeed I implore you, to review our digital journal from tonight's event, and you will see the many, many names of the many law firms who have committed themselves to fighting for justice at the Brennan Center for Justice. And as a result of our partnership with the Brennan Center, we have been able, in just the last few years, to shut down the bogus Trump Voter Fraud Commission, to save the census, to challenge the Muslim ban, to stop voter purges, and to guarantee access and the restoration of voting rights to thousands and thousands of voters. And it is the lawyers at the Brennan Center and our pro bono partners who are keeping the vision of Justice Brennan alive by fighting to restore justice and the rule of law for everyone in the land. So I salute our pro bono partners, and I thank you for making the contribution to restore democracy to America.
On behalf of all of us at the Brennan Center, we are so proud to be a partner of Time to Vote and to have celebrated your vision and your legacy last year at our Legacy Awards dinner in 2019. What a difference a year makes. Here we are in 2020. Time to Vote has been a critical part of the landscape this year, and we're thrilled to have you here to chat a little bit about the journey that you've all taken. I'm going to start with you, Franz. Can you tell us about the original idea and how Time to Vote was started?
Sure. And first, let me just recognize the incredible work that the Brennan Center is doing to help protect the right to vote and the Constitution. Never more important than this year. Time to Vote began with a conversation between PayPal and Patagonia and Levi's that was really about our democratic process and the fact that voter participation was surprisingly low in our democracy, given the stakes that are so high in each election. And we really focused on what could companies like ours do, what would be our highest value. in contributing to more participation in our democracy. And so we started to talk about if we could build a coalition of companies that would help to enable their workforces to be able to participate in the election without having to make hard choices about their obligations or about their ability to be paid. And some companies initially looked at no meetings days. Some companies gave paid time off. Some companies closed. We see this as being more important than ever before. And I think our employees are responding and other companies are responding.
And Coralie, Time to Vote's ranks have grown dramatically this year. Can you tell us a little bit what the campaign looks like now in 2020?
In 2018, there were 411 companies in Time to Vote. And we also saw record turnout in the midterm elections that year. We played a role in that and decided it was worth growing our movement. So we set a goal of recruiting over 1,000 companies for this year. And I am so pleased and so humbled that we've exceeded that goal and now have over 1,500 companies in Time to Vote. This year has been traumatic. We face a health and economic crisis and are confronting a long overdue reckoning of racial injustices in this country. And I think most CEOs are looking for more ways to support their employees. And Time to Vote provided an opportunity to use what John Lewis called the most powerful tool we have in a democracy, and that's the right to vote. In a year of dark and difficult news, this democracy explosion has been a ray of light that we all needed.
That is amazing. Thank you, Coralie. And Daniel, what else can companies do now and for their ongoing commitment to voting rights?
Between now and Election Day, we're calling on all companies not only to join Time to Vote, but to engage employees in the voting process and use the power of our brands and platforms to get citizens and consumers to the polls. I think we all agree here that voting is one of the most powerful ways we can make our voices heard on the most pressing issues of the day. But as Brennan Center knows so well, the right to vote is under threat amid a rash of restricted voter ID laws, as well as these administrative actions like closures of polling places that are making it harder rather than easier to vote. And it's striking, even staggering, to see where these waves of disenfranchisement fall. And that's almost invariably in Black, Brown, and Native communities. And we're honored and proud, alongside the Brennan Center and the Time to Vote partners, to stand up for an inclusive America, one where every vote truly counts.
Thank you. Well, we're proud to stand by all of your sides too. Thank you so much to Time to Vote.
Hello, I'm Sandra Phillips Rogers. It's wonderful to participate in this event, even though we can't be together in person. The injustices of this past year have weighed heavily on my heart, and they brought issues of social justice and equity even more to the forefront for me, both personally and professionally. I've been giving a great deal of thought to the role that companies can play in making a difference. In particular, how can corporate America move beyond making well-intentioned but routine responses to taking real action that truly drives substantive and sustainable change? For us at Toyota, diversity, equity, and inclusion have long been a focus, but we recognize that this is a moment where we need to assess our efforts to ensure that we can move the needle within our company, our community, and our society. That's one reason Toyota's legal team recently launched an ambitious social justice pro bono program to support 6 initiatives that aim to make our legal and democratic systems more just for everyone. One example is the Non-Unanimous Jury Project. This is a partnership between Promise of Justice and lawyers from Dykema, and it works to assist incarcerated people who were unconstitutionally convicted in Louisiana by non-unanimous juries. We also recently participated in the Dallas Expungement Expo, where volunteer attorneys help eligible people file legal documents to expunge their criminal records in order to secure employment. Our legal department's partnering program expands Toyota's commitment to diversity and inclusion to our partner law firms, helping them further positive change with their own diversity and inclusion efforts and create more opportunities for women, people of color, and other diverse attorneys. As part of the program, we make clear that we need them to offer us a diverse team because we expect the kind of outstanding legal advice, creative thinking, and innovative approaches that only come from diversity of thought. It's this work and other similar steps that we are taking that make me proud to work for a company like Toyota, where we put our core value of respect for people at the heart of everything we do. And while I know that there is so much more work to be done, I take heart in knowing that organizations like the Brennan Center continue to fight the good fight and inspire unity. It gives me hope that we will one day be able to achieve equal justice for all.
Karan is an NBA champion, but he's also been a champion for criminal justice reform for a long time. And his life's work has not only been on the basketball court, but in the community. So maybe, Karan, you could just tell everybody a little bit about why these issues are so important to you.
The reason why this work is so important because, I've been through the system. When I think about when I was growing up and, how I was identified and targeted, as a Black male in Wisconsin, it was things about those situations that I just wasn't comfortable with and I couldn't live with. And once I, got older, I just really wanted to bring those situations to light. I wanted to drive change. So I started visiting correctional facilities and institutions. I started advocating for justice and programming in that space, expanding college programs and prisons and other sense of reforms to create pathways for folks returning to this citizenship.
It's not just the criminal justice reform issues and the system issues that we've talked about, but we've seen those in the voting space as well. So maybe talk a little bit about more than a vote and what the hope is to try to make sure that the voter suppression issues are not prevalent in this election and going forward.
This is an initiative that we're all passionate about. Imagine if we all as collectives brought our resources together to just drive change in our states and our counties and our cities, whether it's access to, transportation for voters, whether it's a polling situation and we don't have a location, in a region because we're witnessing voter suppression across the board, supplying the information with a specific call to action, not telling you who to vote for, but just telling you where to go, the who, the what, and the why. And that information and that data has been, priceless. This gives us a sense of how the NBA family is, stepping up to expand access to voting and what you guys are doing as well.
Obviously, there are players like LeBron, Udonis Haslem, others who have gotten involved in these issues. I mean, I could mention dozens of players, but also our teams are very involved in making sure that facilities. I think we're up to 22 teams right now that are going to have their facilities, either a practice facility or their arena available for early voting or day of voting for training. We've also created over the last couple of months a new foundation that's going to be focused on creating greater economic opportunity in the Black community. $30 million every year from our teams for the next 10 years, a huge commitment and a real focus to work together. We're also looking at establishing a social justice coalition so that we continue to work and advocate and educate. Because I think there's a lot that we need to still do. We have to learn more. We have to educate ourselves and each other. This issue of equality and equity is crucial and central to who we are, I think, as a league and everything that our league has always stood for. So we have to keep doing it.
I'm so glad you've had a chance to hear from my colleagues and our partners about the work that's happening all across the country. 2020, it's been a really tough year for so many of us and a time of testing for our country. I think I can say that the Brennan Center has done its part to rise to the moment. Back in March, it was clear it might be impossible to hold an election that's free and fair and secure and safe. We jumped into action. We wrote the plan for vote by mail and safe in-person voting that's being used all over the country. We won $400 million from Congress to fund it. We're deploying our rigorous research to debunk lies about voter fraud. And we're fighting fiercely to protect the vote in Michigan, in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, in Florida, in Georgia, and Texas, now and for days to come. I am so proud of the work the Brennan Center has done this year. And whatever happens in the election, our fight for democracy and justice will go on, must go on. We'll push for a fair census and redistricting, to restore checks and balances. Amid a long overdue reckoning with systemic racism, we will demand criminal justice reform and an end to mass incarceration, to say in every way, Black Lives Matter. And if the political stars align, we may have a once-in-a-generation chance for transformative change. Think about it: automatic voter registration, campaign finance reform, an end to partisan gerrymandering, a restored Voting Rights Act. These all passed the House last year. We can make them the law of the land. The stakes couldn't be higher. And over the coming year, we will do our part in the great fight for the future of American democracy. So thank you. Thank you for all your support, for your commitment, for your hard work. We need it now, and we will need it going forward. If you can, please visit BrennanCenter.org/donate to ensure that our greatest impact can continue. I so look forward to getting together at next year's Brennan Legacy Awards dinner, this time in person. And I want to close by paying tribute to two giants we lost this year. In 2006, we hosted two speakers to mark our 10th anniversary. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a powerful voice from the bench for equality and for voting rights, and Representative John Lewis, who laid his life on the line to create the Voting Rights Act. We were privileged to work with Mr. Lewis over the years and to honor him at the event 15 years ago. He was our North Star until the day he died. And I'm pleased to introduce Anna DeVere Smith, another Legacy Award honoree, to share her personal insights into this powerful force for justice.
This march intends to keep off the highway. We will be marching on the shoulder of the road. To be detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is not only assembly.
Hi, my name is Anna DeVere Smith, and I just want to tell you a story about John. I was writing a play about the subject of grace, and I was in Washington, and I heard a story that John had made his trip to Selma and Birmingham and Montgomery, and that in the course of that trip, a police officer from Montgomery apologized to him for how brutally he'd been treated during the Civil Rights Movement. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to get an interview with John, and I was on a deadline, and I called my friend, the late Congressman Amo Houghton, who was a moderate Republican. He and John, they were like brothers, they really were. And I was at the gym, and I was getting dressed, and my phone rang inside of my locker, and I took it out, and it was one of John's aides saying that, you know, they'd heard from Congressman Houghton, and if I wanted to meet with John, I could. And I said, when? And they said, well, he'll be here for about another hour. So of course I throw my clothes on, I rush across town. And immediately when I walked into his office, I felt this, what I call a radical welcome, just a sense of wholeness and peace. And he told me the story of making his journey and getting to Montgomery at First Baptist Church, and the police chief now, not of the 60s, but the current police chief, apologized to John, you know, and said the way that we treated you here in Montgomery was terrible, and I want to apologize. I want you to forgive us. And out of the respect that I have for you and for the movement, I want to take off my badge and give it to you. And there's this long pause in the way John told the story. And then as he tells the story, he says, Officer, Chief, I cannot accept your badge. And there are places that I tell that story that people burst into applause at that line. I cannot accept your badge, right? Because it's like, heck no, not going to forgive you. I'm not going to take your badge. But then John says, I'm not worthy to accept your badge. Don't you need it? And the chief says, Congressman, I can get another one. I want you to have my badge. And John says, I took it, and I'm never going to forget it, and I'm going to hold on to it forever. And I've thought about that a lot, what it meant for John to say, I forgive you. Right now, we live in such a time of winning and losing. Almost nothing that comes out of any leader's mouth is said with utter sincerity. And so I think in the long run, it's not just about winning and losing in America. It's about trying to restore a moral core. And I even think that's what John Lewis and the civil rights movement were about. And so I believe too in that moral core, in going for the grace in all of us, the potential of the United States of America.
I'm so honored tonight to be allowed to participate with the Brennan Center. The Brennan Center has been telling us for a long time and reminding us that democracy is a battle. We bring more people in, it changes the dynamics of who makes the rules. When we have the kind of reconstruction that changes not only policies, but the personalities that make the policies, and when people are elected by those most impacted, policies can shift. And we can become a nation where the issue is not so much who do we hate, who do we like, left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, red versus blue, but the real questions that ought to be at the center of our public policy discussion is whatever policy it is, does it establish justice? Does it provide for the common defense? Does it promote the general welfare? Does it ensure domestic tranquility? And does it guarantee equal protection under the law for everyone? This is the democracy, the genuine democracy we must fight for. It is on the line now. 5 interlocking injustices, systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism are trying to keep this democracy from breathing. But this is a moment that we must be determined to breathe. With every vote, we must make this democracy take a fresh breath. And we must say in this moment what a songwriter said, writing about Nina Simone. He said, it's not the waking, it's the rising. It's one thing to be awoke or awake, but even if you're awake, that's not enough. You have to get out of bed and use your awakening to make a difference and to change the country and to fight for a genuine democracy and never, ever, ever give up on the promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people, and the vision of being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You've been doing this in the Brennan Center for so long. I've been honored to partner with you, been honored to be awarded by you. I celebrate all of the awardees tonight and say to the President and all of you, keep the fight up. We're in this together. We're gonna win, and we're gonna continue to make America be what it should be, what it has to be, and what it can be. God bless you. Take care.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you for all you do for the Brennan Center. Good night.